Hello, everyone. This is Chad Frischman, and I'm on a quest to find the most impactful solutions that not only help to solve climate change, but move humanity closer to a regenerative future. Climate change is the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced. This is not an alien attack or a monster from the deep seas. It is a crisis of our own making. Nearly everything we do as a species, everything our economy produces and consumes, emits greenhouse gases that are warming the planet and causing catastrophic climate change. And climate change impacts everything else, from increasing poverty and food scarcity to climate refugees, devastating biodiversity loss, and destruction to ecosystems and human systems that we are only beginning to glimpse of today. So, we have to change everything. And this is where it gets interesting. If we have to change everything, then it can be an opportunity to build a better future by design, a regenerative future that benefits humanity and the planet. Welcome to Chad's Climate Quest, where we will be talking to some planetary-grade thinkers and doers who are pouring their energy, wisdom, and intellect to solving this great challenge in ways that benefits all. Now, before we get going in today's discussion, a bit of housekeeping. First, this is the 7th episode of Chad's Climate Quest, and my first Twitter Space podcast. So please be patient with any technical glitches and smile at all of the gaffes. And feel free to send along constructive feedback as we help improve the show. Second, this is only a 30-minute discussion, so if you have any questions, please tweet them in the thread and join the Discord for further discussion. So again, thank you all for joining us today. I'm thrilled to welcome you on my climate quest. On today's episode, we are welcoming a legendary justice advocate, Atossa Soltani. Atossa is the Director of Global Strategy at the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative, an alliance of 30 indigenous nations in Ecuador and Peru, working to permanently protect 86 million acres of rainforests in the Amazon. She is also the founder and board president of Amazon Watch and served as the organization's founding executive director for over 18 years. A prolific speaker on stages the world over who's humbling, authentically, and tirelessly for the rights of indigenous peoples and nature with a seeming unending amount of energy. Hi, Atossa. It's an honor and privilege to have you, my friend, on this show. Thank you for coming along my climate quest.
Thank you so much, Chad. It's a pleasure and an honor to be teaming up with you on this quest.
Yes, I love it. I think we've met each other quite a few times over the years, and feel like we're kindred souls. And I'm really happy to be on this quest with you. And you've been working on protecting the rights of nature and indigenous peoples for a very long time now, Atossa. How did you get started with this work? And I want to know what has really changed over the last 20 years.
I started, really having an epiphany about Gaia, the Gaia hypothesis, literally my first week in college in the 80s. And literally that light bulb went off that the Earth is a living system, that we're not just on the Earth, we are part of and parcel of, we are literally cells in the body of a living Earth. And that, that there is, a host that we need to become aware that we have a host. And so this led me to really on a deep learning about the rainforest as the vital organs of Gaia. And, I became literally obsessed with the rainforest issues around my early 20s. And Rainforest Action Network founder Randy Hayes and got in the game, began as an activist, a volunteer, and then started Amazon Watch in 96 and was the executive director for nearly 2 decades. And now I serve the organization as a president of the board, but I continue to work in the field with indigenous peoples who inspire me every day with their vision, wisdom, and courage to stand in the front lines and really be the immune system of Gaia, to be protecting the forests for not just themselves, for all life, including future generations. So I get to basically spend this time, my life, working in incredible circles of inspiring people, doing very hard work. It's not easy always. Sometimes it's daunting, but we're there every day and keeping at it with a smile, with joy in our heart, and love for the rainforest.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we talked a lot about the last episode with Vandana Hart about joyfully going down this pathway towards the future. We have to find the joy in the work that we're doing. It gives us that energy to keep going. And you touched on something I think is really key is like, it takes so much energy to be a justice advocate. I mean, particularly when one does it right. And what I mean by that is, and you alluded to this, is so many in this space pontificate about justice and human rights and climate, but have never really rolled up their sleeves and been to the field, and gone and done the on the ground work with the people they're pontificating about. In addition to the desk work and being on stage and now increasingly social media. But this is exactly what you do and have done for decades now, which in my book is what really makes you a legend. And I really believe that. How do you find that energy, though? How do you find energy to keep going when year after year we see so many setbacks in our ecosystem, in the Amazon, with Indigenous peoples all over the world still in persecution and fighting for these rights? How do you find the energy to keep going?
Well, I think that the time that we spend in community with amazing leaders from the front lines, Indigenous wisdom keepers, women leaders, young leaders who are basically putting their lives on the line to defend the forest, it's very humbling. And, we, of course, are also looking at scientific information and seeing that we really have no choice. It's not a matter of like waking up and saying, am I hopeful today? Do I have energy to fight the fight? It's really just getting up and knowing our purpose, knowing our mission, and showing up every day for the fight. One of the things that I would say is that the incredible people who are on the front lines are doing the heavy lifting, and it is an honor for us to be allies and partners. And of course, the first thing we do is build trust. We show up, we build trust, we listen, we scan the horizon and learn from what has been happening. And one of the things you can see when you look at the Indigenous movement, especially in the Amazon basin, is that they've been very successful. While on a macro level, we're losing the Amazon at an alarming rate and reaching a tipping point of no return. I'll get to that in a moment. But on a micro level, Indigenous peoples that I've had the honor to work with over and over, I would say the vast majority of the battles that we have really dug in and led, they've led and we've supported, we've made a huge difference. There are places that are still intact and roadless and biodiverse because Indigenous peoples have successfully resisted and won lawsuits, legal actions, direct action, boycotts, financial, divestment, and these things are still standing. There's huge areas of the Ecuadorian and Peruvian Amazon where more than 3 decades and oil companies have tried to go in there and have failed because of Indigenous resistance. So that gives me hope. I think also just that, there's this time that you spend in the forest, whether it's North American rainforest or the Amazon, the time you spend in nature, connecting and communing and literally listening to the earth and being a voice for the earth. And, that connection moves us. There's nothing more than the awe of being in rainforest with incredible wildlife and birds and insects. It's just to infuse yourself with life, teeming, and recognize that you are also not fighting for nature. You are nature, defending it. Yeah, so I'd say those things. But, there are definitely hard days. There are days that people are assassinated or that we lose a battle. We have lost battles. One of my mentors just passed away. Jonas Minton, he was a great leader in the water fights in California and stopping dams. When we lost the Belo Monte Dam, it was a 10-year battle to stop the third largest dam in the world in the Brazilian Amazon. And we fought really hard and we lost. The dam was built. And it was a very devastating battle. We really got fried in the process of doing everything. More than 20 lawsuits that we were winning, but they would still fail to stop the dam. And Jonas gave me a really important piece of advice. He said, the way we fought in the West and won battles to stop dams is that after we lost, we got even more organized. We lost the battle, but we didn't lose the war. We kept going. We worked on, learning lessons and building a movement and writing legislation and doing it better and better. It was after we lost the battle that we got organized enough to win the war.
That's incredible advice that we need to be taking. I think we should all need to be taking to heart. No, it's not about the short-term tactics and winning every single time. It's about how we learn from the battles that we take on to win the fight in the long run, because this is not something that we can expect to win. We're up against some really challenging institutions and organizations and individuals who don't think the same way as we do. So I love that lesson that you learn at that time. How can we learn from what we're losing, where we're losing, and use it as use it for the next battle to win more and more. And I think part of what this is also the stories aren't getting told. I mean, we hear about this all the time. And more broadly in the solution space is that there are great successes happening, but we tend to be overwhelmed with what's not working and all of the problems. But we need to, focus on, as you're saying, there are these solutions and wins that are happening every day on the ground, micro scale though they might be, but on macro they make a difference. But it also sounds like you might have found along the way that the fountain of youth here. I mean, that connection to nature really invigorates you, it seems like, in the work that you do. And I frankly, when I first met you, I thought you were my age, 30s, 40s. You are filled with that energy and excitement to make a difference in the world, and particularly make a difference in the Amazon. So the Amazon, which is your new initiative, the Sacred Headwaters Initiative, Amazon is one of the most biodiverse regions on the planet and essential for the Earth systems to operate as we know it. And there are imminent tipping points caused from global warming that threaten the Amazon, in addition to the degradation that's happening every day in the Amazon. Can you tell us a little bit more about why this biosphere is so essential to the planet as we know it? And what is this tipping point that we all have to be aware of?
Sure. The Amazon rainforest, being the largest rainforest on the planet, is literally the heart of the hydroclimatic system of our biosphere. And I know that's a big word there, but just to break it down, the Amazon actually serves to drive weather system and rainfall across the continent of South America, but also around the world. We know that that this action happens, this biotic pump, this part of the circulatory system of water around the planet happens because trees evapotranspire incredible amounts of moisture, as does soil. And that evapotranspiration means that on average, one mature tree is able to put vapor into the atmosphere at a rate of 1,000 liters a day. And you have in the Amazon the largest forest, 400 billion trees, lifting up 1,000 liters of water per day. That is an atmospheric river that is generated by the Amazon into the sky, a river in the sky that is basically cycling rain and bringing moisture deeper and deeper into the continent of South America. It's the greenest continent on Earth. And then also hits the Andes and goes all the way up to North America. In Central America, we see that springtime rains in, for example, US Southwest come from the rainforest in the Amazon. And that the trees are doing this heavy lifting, and the moisture that's generated also helps cool the forest, cool the earth. And it's literally the rain machine and the hydrological pump of the planet. Now, of course, trees are key to this. We've already lost, between deforestation and forest degradation, we have lost something around 26% of the Amazon.
Mm.
The modeling shows that when we get close to 25%, between 20 and 25%, we tip the biome is tipped. The hydrological cycle is tipped to a point where that circulation system that I was thinking about starts to unravel. The trees are no longer there to generate the circulation, and so we start to see a dieback. The dieback might take 50 to 100 years, but the dieback could be as much as 70% of the Amazon. That would be, if you've considered that the Amazon is also one of the largest carbon sinks on the planet, you would be releasing a significant amount of emissions and losing the Earth's capacity to cool itself and cycle water. It is definitely one of the biggest, most important tipping points on the planet. Now, the report that just came out on September 5th said we are at tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
But it also said that there's still time, there's still action that we must take if we help to basically get to zero deforestation, restore parts of the Amazon that are critical for that hydrological system to function, and get to, a regenerative economy. We need to do that by 2025. So it's an emergency, and but its time is now. So within this context of the planet's life support system, one of the key areas of the Amazon, the most biodiverse part of the Amazon, is the headwaters, where the Andes meets the Amazon. And here, what we find is some of the most intact landscapes, both cultural, indigenous peoples' territories, and biological diversity is flourishing here. In the headwaters where I started working about 25 years ago, indigenous peoples have done a really amazing job of protecting their territories, are some of the most biodiverse. So, but 80% of this landscape in the headwaters of the Amazon is threatened by mining, by oil drilling, and pipelines and dams and roads. And what we have is that we're at crossroads, basically.
Mhm.
Keeping in mind that we have to protect 80% of the Amazon by 2025, and we have to basically protect areas that are refugia, areas that are biodiverse and indigenous territories. That sacred headwaters shows up right there as one of the global priorities for conservation. We're at crossroads. If the government's plans for industrial extraction pan out, 80% of this area would be intervened in the next 10 to 20 years. What we did is working with the Indigenous Alliance of 30 nations. At this point, we have 27 organizations,
Yeah.
of majority are Indigenous, are part of an alliance to permanently protect this area and create an ecological transition to a standing forest bioeconomy that's regenerative and just, based on well-being principles of Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples talk a lot about when we reach the idea of harmony, collective harmony with nature, collective harmony with all life. And that is their mantra. It is their drumbeat to which their existence is based and their cosmology. Based on that cosmology, we came together 5 years ago in this super alliance, committed to taking a different path, not going at this crossroads, taking a different towards permanent protection of the headwaters, the most biological diverse ecosystem on Earth. And here, Indigenous peoples are helping define solution pathways together with experts that we brought together to create a bioregional plan. And the bioregional plan
Mhm.
can be downloaded on sacredheadwaters.org. And it is basically innovative, comprehensive, I think, inspiring plan, and a plan for 2030, but basically how we leave behind extractive economies for flourishing, regenerative, well-being economies led by Indigenous peoples, guided by their wisdom and their knowledge, traditional knowledge. And it includes everything. It's a holistic plan because Indigenous peoples think beyond silos. They think very much about holism. So it's basically addressing land rights, land claims. It's creating permanent protection status in areas that are threatened by oil and mining. It's calling for a moratorium and leaving fossil fuels and minerals in the ground. It's really pushing forward the technical resources for Indigenous peoples to monitor and protect their forests and exercise their right to self-determination. It also includes everything
Mhm.
from renewable energy and solar
Mhm.
canoes to restoring 20 million acres of deforested areas and addressing basically women's rights and empowerment, youth training and leadership.
Mhm.
It's got every piece of, it's almost like its own mini sustainable development goals, but even more far reaching with the idea of putting at the center of all of this ecological integrity of the biome as well as justice. And so we hope that people get involved and help us implement this plan. We've just gone from planning to the implementation phase. We're working on a leadership school and livelihood alternatives and reforestation projects and continuing to fight legally in the courts to stop the destructive development. So our long-term goal is that this area would be flourishing and a model for the world, and still in by 2030 would have a model for a living bioeconomy. So yeah, I'm very excited about it. There are no impressions of how monumental of an initiative this is, simply
Yeah.
how transformative it is. It's actually because it's so huge and ambitious that it has power to transform and inspire. And so, yeah, we invite everyone to get involved, sign the declaration, get involved with our campaign to protect the headwaters.
Thank you, Atossa. I mean, I love this because I feel like I like anticipated. Like I said before, we're definitely connected here because I feel like you just anticipated all of my key questions diving into this work, and a lot of that was right there. What are those solutions that exist to avert this catastrophe that we're seeing, this tipping point, and they're there, and that's really the key point here is that these bioregional planning and activating communities to have these partnerships to accelerate those solutions and to implement those solutions is what really can, as I'm hearing, can save the Amazon, but not just the Amazon, but this can something like right. This could be a model, a plan that we could be emulating in different parts of the world to address many of these great challenges that touched upon climate, and as you touched on sustainable development, and of course lead further into that regenerative economy and society, which is really the quest that we're on together. So thank you for sharing all of that. And one of the things that I think that we do need to think through in how we accelerate the implementation of these solutions in the context in which they make sense with using these bioregional planning mechanisms is, investment, funding. Where is that capital coming from, and how is it being diverted to on the ground projects, which you're so familiar with? I mean, I remember you once told me that there are thousands of micro projects as well as many big ones just in the Amazon alone that need funding through the work that you're doing through the Sacred Headwaters Initiative and the 30 nations that are participants in it. How can investors and funders direct capital to ensure that it gets into the hands of peoples and communities that are actually doing this work, that are actually implementing these solutions at scale, and of course, part of this planning? And not just talk about it, but actually doing it. What's missing, and how can we direct investors and funders to cut out the middleman and get those funds to where it's really being used?
And that's a great question. If you look at conservation funding and conservation and sustainable development funding, reports say that, less than 1% end up in indigenous territories. So it's a big challenge. And funders are being, glad made a commitment that they were going to put billions, several billions into the hands of indigenous frontline communities around the world. And if you look at it, what we're doing in the headwaters is not just unique to the headwaters. If you look at the global trends, indigenous peoples are the guardians of 60% of the world's intact forests. And get this, 80% of the world's biodiversity is on indigenous lands.
Mm-hmm.
Yet less than 1% of dollars that go to protect forests and address climate and address sustainable development goals end up in indigenous peoples' organizations and communities. So there is definitely a huge gap in the way funding is flowing. A lot of big organizations are able to muster and marshal resources, and big and funders say, well, we don't know how to get indigenous people's funding. It's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But we've been able to say, look, it takes commitment on the part of financial investment, financial and philanthropic communities. We have to basically put indigenous peoples on your board. You have to give them decision-making authority, that from program officers, for example, foundations. You have to become, put indigenous peoples in leadership position in these organizations that would need to resources, because then you have a link, then you have bridges to the front lines. What we've done is we are creating, currently the Sacred Headwaters Initiative is housed at the Pachamama Alliance, who's been doing a tremendous job being a fiscal sponsor, an incubator, and fundraiser and ally for many decades to the indigenous peoples. And so it's housed there. But the work that's happening now has created a governing council of over 30 indigenous leaders who are helping decide how funding is spent. Basically, governance is the key. They're collectively deciding how to allocate resources and how to prioritize our work. And in the coming year, and so currently they have the ability to receive funding directly in their territories through a fund that we set up at the Pachamama Alliance, and it goes directly to the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the future, the Sacred Headwaters Initiative will be its first indigenous-led NGO, and we'll have U.S. and South American presence, and that's in the works. It'll probably take a year, but in the meantime, we have a fiscal sponsor, and we are acting as if it is an indigenous organization. And I would say it's probably, I may be wrong, but it could most likely be the largest indigenous-led conservation initiative on the planet. And I think the beauty is that when we started, we said we were going to invest in capacity, helping indigenous peoples build their capacity, do their strategic plans, have lawyers, have salaries, have money for transportation and assemblies, help them do accounting, and do better job of transparently monitoring their progress. And all of that for the last 5 years has really positioned the indigenous organizations that are part of our alliance ready, like funding ready to direct to the front line. So I would say, we have hundreds of projects emerging from the front lines, and we're very excited about channeling resources to those. We're also working to really change philanthropy, to say all around the world, philanthropy needs to become more participatory, more informed by the front lines. As you said earlier, not our people in the north thinking they have the solutions is they have part of the solutions. I don't want to discredit that. But I think what we are seeing is that what's going to work is what comes from the ground. And ultimately, indigenous peoples are organizing so that they can themselves create collectives that are able to receive larger sums of money and better allocate it to where it needs to go. We get every day, we get dozens of requests about an illegal invasion of miners, or a lawsuit that needs to be filed, or a trip to bring Indigenous leaders to a shareholder meetings to confront the CEO of a company that's drilling in their territory, or study for the viability of an economic product like vanilla in the rainforest. We get all kinds of requests in the secretariat of the Sacred Headwaters, and we'd love to be able to increase our capacity to say yes and to rally people.
I think that's first amazing work that you're doing. Really, I think it's essential, as you pointed out, that we get that capital to the people who are using it, right? Not the people in the middle ground, right? Who are the intermediaries between Indigenous communities and the philanthropic funds and investors and so on. We need to get it straight to the hands of the people who are working on this. Really, really important. So any mechanisms that you all are working on. I also, recall at New York Climate Week, and they had launched several philanthropies had launched a new project called Shandia, which was designed to do something very similar, financial mechanisms to direct funds directly to frontline communities, and was led by Indigenous leaders from all over the world, actually. So there's more and more of these initiatives and mechanisms happening, which is really, I think, a great thing. But I also think that part of it, and I think you touched upon this when you kind of alluded to those solutions. There are other solutions coming from the north, from the more Western scientific view. Of course, we need all solutions on the table, and to do so in a really integrated way, I would say. But there are a lot of folks who you and I have spent a lot of time learning from and with Indigenous peoples, and it's a journey that continues for us today, and will continue forevermore. But many listeners do not really understand what teachings Indigenous peoples can pass on to the modern world. Right? There is a little bit of a disjunction between the viewpoint of a scientific, data-driven, predominantly northern viewpoint on knowledge and Indigenous knowledge. So how do we make this bridge happen? Clearly, we need to. What are some concrete lessons that maybe you've learned, Atossa, that you would point to as like really key to understanding and incorporating Indigenous knowledge in the way northern mentality or more scientific approaches may benefit from?
Well, yeah, I could speak for a long time about that. And
right.
We should do another episode where we bring in one of our Indigenous wisdom keepers from the Sacred Headwaters Initiative. It'd be a little bit difficult with translation, but I think we could ask some of these questions. But so I would say one of the main things is the worldview, to say that how we see the world defines the outcomes. The very fundamental systems view of life is that the world as alive, the earth as living. The rainforest, they call it the living forest. Everything's alive. The rivers are alive. All species are alive. Trees are alive. Forest is alive. That worldview changes the way you relate to things. You relate to nature not as an object, but as a collective of subjects, just like humans, with voices, with rights, with the right to exist and evolve. And from that place is something that anthropologists call kinship ecology. This idea of that everything is my kin, all my relations. I am related to everything. And I'm also related to the past and the future. There's no real silos between my ancestors and the unborn generations. So people are trained and taught from childhood that their aspiration ought to be good ancestors to future generations of all life, not just human life.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be good at to come into the world, we are as children, we're like driven to be successful, to be rich, to be, have a trait that's our specialty, and to be very much driven to our personal success. In Indigenous cultures, often it's about being good ancestors to future generations, being in reciprocity to the earth, being in kinship to all that is alive. So I think from that worldview, and it's not just that they believe the earth is their mother, it's not just that they believe that, it's that they live it. It's their reality. Many ancient cultures relate to Mother Earth is more than just, I would say, religious view. It's the way they see the world. So I think worldview is one of the main things we need to shift. And in our world, like I said earlier, Gaia is a living system. And if we were to take on the teachings of Indigenous peoples to see ourselves as cells, productive cells in a living earth, in the body of a living earth, in the way that every cell in your body keeps you alive, you are keeping the earth alive, and vice versa. The earth keeps you alive. It's this mutual benefit relationship that exists in nature. So those principles of living systems are not just indigenous stories. They're also principles of biology, of biomimicry, of the way nature works and thrives. Nature works in communities of life that cooperate to create more life. And that is the mantra that we learn from biomimicry. And so Indigenous peoples live that way. So I would say those worldviews are some of the key lessons. Out of that worldview, I think shifts happen in the way we act on a daily basis. And, that's the proof. The proof of that is that Indigenous territories are teeming with 80% of the world's biodiversity because everything's their kin. So, but I think beyond that, Indigenous peoples also have scientific knowledge around how it works, patterns of life, biology, plant species. I mean, an Indigenous person walking around the Amazon by the time they're in their 40s, just average Joe, I would say, average Amazonian Jose, is basically can identify somewhere around 400 or 500 species of plants and use it and know it's good for a canoe or cough or medicine, or this one helps to reduce blood pressure. They have knowledge of plants, not just that's just an average person. By the time you take into account the medicine people, the elders, the shamans, the curanderos, the maestros, maestras, also especially women, by the time you take into account those specializing in traditional ecological knowledge, you get people who might know as many as 1,000 plants. Easily. And so that is scientific knowledge. Not just know those plants, know their patterns, know their properties, also wildlife, how wildlife moves, when is the season. It's been this traditional knowledge that's been coming from perspective of a living forest that we honor as our mother. And so it's very respectful. At the same time, it's rich. And we're also comes from language and stories. Each language is like a whole world, whole universe of understanding. And of course, we're losing those languages so rapidly.
Well, I think those are all really key lessons. And one of the things I think, I mean, all of the above, of course. And one of the things I really like that you mentioned is, and I love that story, that statistic you gave me, or quote unquote statistic, the average person in the Amazon, how many plant species does the average one person know? It's really astounding, and really speaks to the connection that Indigenous peoples have to their natural surroundings on a day-to-day basis. And, there are ways that this can certainly bridge with, the more Western scientific approaches. And I worked on a project prior to launching Drawdown, where we're working with UNESCO to bridge meteorological science. So scientists working on understanding weather patterns with on-the-ground Indigenous communities. And that's a help because, exactly as you point out, they have learned over countless generations through their passing on of stories and through their traditions how to understand at the micro scale small changes in the environment that have significant impact on food production, on weather patterns, and so on. And you can bridge these by bringing scientists together in the same room with Indigenous elders, peoples who have that knowledge. And if there's an equal exchange of knowledge with respect to each other's worldviews and perspectives, and trying to incorporate that and trying to learn, you can have magic. Magic happens. And these knowledge systems can be created together in a really powerful way. So I really love that you pointed that out. And of course, one thing I did want to end with, because we are running out of time, is Amazon Sacred Headwaters just produced this amazing short film. I love it. The Amazonia 2041, a vision from the future. And I encourage all of the listeners to go on YouTube and check it out. But it told the story of what happened between now and 2041, to change the world, right? To really change the world, to solve the great challenges humanity has been facing. And as I encourage everyone to watch it. Atossa, what was the key ingredient in that film that made that future possible? What was the solution?
There were so many, but one of the key things was that Indigenous peoples had the vision and the resources and the support to lead us in this transition to a new economy based on the flourishing of life. That they were the beacons that helped guide the process, and that was one of the key things. But there's so many things. Like, for example, addressing the rights of nature is a paradigm shifting thing. Having rivers and forests become subjects of the law, withstanding to sue on their own behalf for their future survival, is a paradigm shifting framework that can address the ugly side of capitalism, the life-blind nature of capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
become life-seeing by providing rights of nature frameworks, laws, making things like ecocide crime, addressing issues of financial system. We have to re-engineer the financial system to be, not indebting the most vulnerable countries. The most biodiverse countries are the most indebted. In fact, the reason we're destroying the Amazon, the reason governments allow all this destructive activities, they're in a straitjacket, burdened by external debt. Mostly they're drilling, mining, just to pay the interest on the external debt. Their GDPs are equal to their external debt. So they're basically in financial slavery as countries, and they're mortgaging the Amazon and our future for paying back. So we have to rethink the financial system. So in this film, we talk about debt relief, and we talk
Mm-hmm.
about standing forest economy jobs, and the fact that people came to Indigenous peoples to learn about bioregional planning, ethno forest philosophy, living forest, when we veer philosophy, etc. But there are many solutions. I won't spoil it, but it was inspired by AOC. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez created a similar film called A Message from the Future, and she's brilliantly narrates a future for North America based on a Green New Deal. And when we saw that, my colleagues said, the bioregional plan can be very complex, and let's create our version of this film about a positive future that can inspire us and pull us towards it.
Well, thank you, Atossa, and thank you for sharing your time and energy with me today. I typically ask my guests what their marker on the horizons, what their vision of a regenerative future is. But I think through the conversation that we've had today, you have already articulated that. And for those of you who want to get a better sense of that, go watch that YouTube film. It's really, really amazing. And that is a vision of a regenerative future. Atossa, it's always a pleasure. You're a friend, colleague, my salsa partner, dancing partner on occasion.
Oh,
You better believe it. I'm looking forward to the next time.
That's the other key, Chad. Keep dancing. That's
Yeah, right. Keep dancing. And I'm also really honored to be working with you on my new projects, the Global Solutions Alliance and Project People. So we'll be partnering with the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative and bringing and working with you on a more regular basis. So thank you for being part of Chad's Climate Quest, Atossa. I look forward to continuing to joyfully journey on this quest together for creating that regenerative future.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Chad's Climate Quest. Stay tuned for our next episode when I will be talking to another planetary-grade thinker and doer, implementing real solutions to create a regenerative future. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm thrilled to welcome you on my Climate Quest.